Hey, Derek.
Hey, Peter.
How you doing?
Doing well.
We have a guest today.
We do. It's Jacob Hurwitz, founder of American Trench, someone I've been following online for many, many years now, and probably the best quote unquote PR email that I ever received, largely because it wasn't a PR email. Jacob emailed me many, many years ago, maybe like 10 years ago now, just commenting on one of my blog posts. And he was enthusiastic about something I had mentioned. And we just became friends online. And it was only later that I learned that he had founded this company, American Trench, that I later bought socks from and really like.
Wow.
And he's been a champion of American-made products. And I thought he'd be a great guest to talk about American-made goods. Welcome to the pod, Jacob.
Welcome.
Gentlemen, thank you.
So you started American Trench when?
I started American Trench with my co-founder, David, in February of 2010.
2010. That's the height of the hashtag menswear kind of movement at the time.
It was, yes, peak hashtag menswear.
What led you to start the brand?
It was a mix of economic philosophy. I really wanted to support American manufacturing. That's a very real thing for me. I was working in finance at the time, and I really felt like the 2008 recession was caused by getting away from our roots as a manufacturing nation, turning raw materials into manufactured goods. And then also, I wanted to do something artistic and make something that was an interest of mine.
Did you start off? Because I feel like a lot of what I know you for is socks, but you started off with trench coats. Is that right?
Yeah, the original product was a trench coat, hence the name American Trench. I went to London in the summer of 2009 with my wife on vacation, and we went to Piccadilly Circus. We had high tea at Fordham and Mason, and afterwards we went across the street to the Burlington Arcade, and there was some guy in there selling dead stock Aquascutum raincoats out of cardboard boxes.
Wow.
And I bought an Aquascutum raincoat, and it was super cool. It had all this great detail, and it was sort of, it's like the redheaded stepchild to Burberry.
Word on the street is that Aquascutum was the brand that Humphrey Bogart wore. Is that right?
I don't know, but
Was that famous trench from Aquascutum?
That's the word on the street. Everyone was saying, well, it couldn't have been Burberry. Humphrey Bogart was a fan of Aquascutum. So no one knows for sure, but that's the lore.
The brand now is no longer even manufactured in Britain, I don't think.
No,
I think that
sadly.
they've either complete offshored production or has become a shell of its former self, I believe.
You're talking about Burberry.
Well, Aquascutum. I mentioned them in a blog post many, many, many years ago. And a reader emailed me about maybe 6 months ago and said, I was reading this article on where to buy trench coats, and your link to Aquascutum brings me to a porn site. And true enough, I was like, no, that's not. First off, no, that's not possible. I linked Aquascutum. Someone would have reported this a long time ago. Went to the site, clicked it, and it brought me to aquascutum.co.uk or something like that. And it was indeed like a porn site. And I was like, what the heck? And it turns out the real Aquascutum site now is like some really weird, clunky URL, like Aquascutum-coats or something. I think what happened is that they let their URL lapse, and then some, kind of enterprising, kind of snake had basically snatched it up and is trying to get money. That's what I assume. Because I was not looking at Aquascutum porn.
It's not even a licensing play anymore. Then it's not even being used in a licensing manner.
I mean, it's the same story as a lot of manufacturing, both in the UK and the US, is that things were made here at some point, slowly offshored, and then has become sort of just a name, without its original manufacturing capacity.
Well, that trench that I bought in 2009 was made in the UK, and I still have it, and it still hits. It's pretty dope.
Was this the springboard to make you say, why don't we do anything like this in the United States? Or is that a turning point?
100%. I went to, my friend and future business partner, David, and said, who makes these in the United States? And we did research, and it was no one. It was like, okay, well, London Fog used to be, the American manufacturer that made rainwear. So you're like, okay, well, we're going to try to make a London Fog. And that became, American Trench.
When did you then get into socks?
So it took like 2.5 years to develop the coat. That was a whole thing. We didn't know nothing about nothing. And we were, going to launch on Kickstarter. Kickstarter was a big deal at that time. Yeah. It was a way for a lot of brands to sort of start off. And I didn't want to make a like merch t-shirt. Like I just felt like we were going to make landfill if we did that for a brand that nobody knows about. And we kind of brainstormed and like, okay, well, what could we make? Like, all right, well, everyone likes socks. Like, let's make something useful. So I started doing, research. I'm like an internet Wolverine, like I don't stop until I get what I want. And I found a bunch of companies and then you got to get off the internet and you got to start making phone calls. And for anyone out there who wants to start a brand, if you think you can do it just with emails, you can't. You got to pick up the phone and start calling people. So I found 2 companies that, would take my call, and one of them was in North Carolina, both family-owned sock factories, and another was actually in my own area. And I, talked to the owners, and I figured out what we could make, relatively quickly that didn't require giant developments, and I didn't know anything about socks at the time. So it was sort of just like selecting house styles. And we had, I think, 3 solid socks, a single stripe sock, and then we had 3 wool herringbone socks. So the inaugural collection was 7 SKUs.
Wow. Okay.
Do you have any favorite memories of visiting these factories?
I didn't visit the factory in North Carolina. The one that was near me in Philly was visitable. But I didn't visit the one in North Carolina until a full year later after launch. I couldn't get down there in time.
What's it like visiting some of these factories?
Well, hosiery factories are definitely different than cut and sew. Hosiery factories are full of these, machines, and they're loud and they take up a fair bit of space, and then there's sort of these busy bees that hover around them, changing things, yarns and, fixing stuff and dials. And then there's sort of ancillary rooms full of yarns. So hosiery is definitely its own world. I mean, I think the hosiery factories themselves it's fascinating to see the machines. And, when you go there, they'll stop the machines in the middle of knitting a sock and show you sort of where the sock is. And the thing that really struck me with, seeing a sock factory for the first time was just the intense amount of skill and incredible, technical innovation that went into creating these machines and then running them, and at the end of it all, it spits out this sock. It takes a cone of yarn at the top of the thing. They hang on these racks called krills. And in the South, they say creels. And they load the yarns into the machine, and then all this crazy whirling and all this stuff happens, and there's a computer screen. And at the end, 4 minutes later, a sock shoots out of the side of the machine. But that wow. Isn't even the end of it. That then on certain machines, the seaming happens on the machine, but on older machines that, a pair of human hands has to then close the toe seam. And then after that, it has to get finished. And that's a whole nother process. The sock gets put onto a sock form called a board, which sort of looks like a metal die cut cast of a foot. And then it gets run through like a sock car wash.
Wow.
And every single sock has to be taken and put on those boards by hand. It's not done mechanically. It's too difficult. So every single pair is touched by human hands.
Is there a particular advantage to manufacturing socks in the U.S., or do you just choose the U.S. for national pride reasons?
I mean, I choose the U.S. because I want to support U.S. labor and craft. I do think, there is still a functioning, hosiery industry here, and it's almost all in North Carolina and the northern tip of Alabama and a little bit in eastern Tennessee.
Oh, wow.
How long have these factories been around, do you know?
They've been making hosiery in that area for over 100 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, one of my factories, it's on family-owned land, and his grandfather started, over 100 years ago. His grandfather started knitting socks when the town received its first power lines.
Wow. And do they tell you how things are currently going? Are they struggling? Are they doing well?
I mean, it was definitely much, much bigger in the 80s before NAFTA. NAFTA definitely took a big toll on the industry. And there was a big shift. There was a shift from, making commodity goods to specializing more, higher end, wool items, things with a higher price point that could, stand up to a higher labor cost.
That's true for the rest of the entire kind of U.S. clothing manufacturing scene, right? Like,
absolutely,
the U.S. can't compete as easily with basically commodity things that you can compare. Just cheap T-shirt to cheap T-shirt. They often have to move upstream on the value chain and manufacture things as you noted earlier, like trench coats, outerwear, things that take a little bit more skill, but then also you can charge more for it.
Or focus on, better materials or a certain kind of manufacturer or a certain specialty, like hiking socks made out of this type of wool, or or this other sock made out of this other thing. But it had, there has to be some focus on, a certain level of premium materials and craft. And I think the factories that were like, no, we'll just try to compete on commodity, that all went away.
Yeah, many of the clothing unions or the trade unions in the clothing industry also collapsed with the opening of NAFTA. It was just very difficult to maintain, good union jobs when companies were importing really cheap T-shirts. There was such downward wage pressure on American clothing workers, manufacturers.
But it is still there in North Carolina, the hosiery industry. And the important thing is that, there's enough mills that still exist to support other infrastructure that has to exist to make the whole thing work. And that includes yarn companies, yarn twisters, yarn dyers.
Are those local?
Yes, they're all there. There's a whole ecosystem that still exists in North Carolina.
Oh, nice. Wow. So the yarns, the dyeing, the spinning, all of that is done locally?
I mean, not all of it. There's definitely, imports coming in from all over the world. And I don't buy all of my yarn from North Carolina. I buy a fair bit of it, but there are certain yarns that I can't get there, like cashmere and other things like that.
Right.
Special novelty yarns, I buy a lot of those from Italy. I buy cashmere from Todd and Duncan of Scotland.
What are the American-made yarns?
For American-made yarns, it's all cotton, and there are some very special American-made cotton yarns. Specifically, my favorite is Hill Spinning. Hill Spinning is the last American-made, or is the last family-owned all cotton yarn spinner in the country that I know of. And the owner, Mark Leonard, says that he is the last of the finest. And I think the product there is incredible. When I went to visit there, I went to the wrong side of the building first, and there were like sort of weird pieces of like cotton floating around this like gravel parking lot. And then I finally went to the correct side, and I went in, and the owner took me down to the basement where the cotton enters the building, where I'd sort of incorrectly gone. And he showed me the whole process of literally bales of cotton going through these various processes and cycles of refinement. And then, waste comes out, and then it gets thrown back in the machine to get refined again. And then, it goes to the next step and the next step. And, raw cotton turns into a cone of yarn. It goes by floor. Like a whole bunch of things happen on the basement level, and then they move to the next floor, and then finally they move to the top floor where the spinning frames are. And on the top floor, you hold a finished cone of cotton yarn in your hand, and it is wild. It is a crazy wild thing.
Are they also using American grown cotton?
Yes. Yep.
Oh, wow.
In fact, like, you can't call Mark during the cotton harvest season. Like, he's like too busy.
Do you know how many people he employs?
I feel like there might be 30 to 40 people there.
Does it exist in like a small town or something, or?
Yes, it does. Yep.
Are they one of the bigger kind of employers in the region? Like, is it like a Garland kind of shirt factory kind of operation? What's the relationship?
I mean, they're definitely a big employer in the town. Another thing is, like, that yarn from Hill Spinning, the owner Mark told me that he runs his comber slower than the other larger corporate owned spinning mills.
Can you explain to our listeners what combing means?
It's literally these metal combers, pick at the yarn to then fluff them to make them softer. And it combing happens on the yarn level. It also will happen on the fabric level. Combing happens to fabric to flannelize it, to make cotton flannel or wool flannel. And it can happen for both knits and woven. So, like, wool fleece has been, combed or brushed. But it can happen on the yarn level, and it can also happen on the fabric level. And he runs his combers at a slower speed so that they get more combed, they get softer. And I felt it, and I think the Hill yarn is softer and nicer than the equivalent yarn from one of the other larger mills.
Do they make a specific type of cotton, Pima cotton, or is it just your generic cotton?
The Hill does not run Pima cotton, and I asked the owner about that, and Pima cotton is a certain fiber length, and his machines are not calibrated to that.
Okay.
But the yarn that he runs he makes ring spun yarn, both regular ring spun, and then he does ring spun combed. And his ring spun combed yarn, I think it's like a stone's throw from Pima. Like, it's like diet Pima, in the best way. Like, it just feels so amazing, even though it's not Pima.
Can you explain to our listeners what ring spun means?
It's a type of spinning frame. There's like a ring involved, and like, I've seen it in person. The yarn spins around the ring as it's on the spinning frame. And it creates sort of a nicer feeling yarn than open end spinning.
It makes for a more comfortable sock at the end, right?
It does. It does.
One of the reasons why we brought you on is because I think there's a lot of, I get this question often on Twitter, people wondering why something costs, the way it does, especially for American-made products. Not to say all American-made products are this way. There's fast fashion produced in Los Angeles, for example, and those things cost, like $5 for a shirt. But many of the items that we're talking about, the kind of like higher end goods, as cheap imports have come into the country, and many of our factories have moved upstream in terms of on the value chain, a lot of the stuff is kind of expensive. A t-shirt retails can be like $30 to $50. Printed t-shirts can be more. Jeans are commonly, on the retail end, maybe $200 and up. And I think a lot of people are wondering, why is it so expensive? Especially when they are going to not even like H&M or Shein, but if they're going to the Gap, or if they're going to Old Navy and they see jeans retailing for maybe like $30. So one of the things I want to get into is exactly the cost breakdown from someone who has worked in American clothing manufacturing. What is some of the cost breakdown of what it costs to make, let's say, a t-shirt, let's say a graphic t-shirt in the US? Do you happen to know?
I can certainly help you with that. I will answer that question from sort of a small brand perspective, rather than like, I'm a giant company and I have huge economies of scale.
Right. Because that changes the perspective if you're ordering thousands and thousands.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you could certainly push the prices lower. if the larger retailers of this country wanted to make their products in this country, they could absolutely push the prices lower. Would it be as low as their imports? I don't know. Would it be dramatically lower than what I can get? Absolutely.
So what does it cost to make a graphic tee in the US?
So, okay, let's go with the graphic tee, and let's assume that I choose.
Want to hear the rest? Listen to the full episode and many more other exclusive episodes over on our Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Blamo to sign up and join the Blam fam. You also get access to our exclusive members-only Slack group where we chat about this and a ton of other things. So head over to patreon.com/Blamo and we'll see you there.